Well, I'm Dave Hettick. I work out at the Hot Springs field office. I've been with the state of South Dakota for over 35 years here now. I'm a lot more comfortable out in the woods talking to you than I am standing up here in front of you. I'm supposed to talk for a half an hour. I don't know whether I can do that or not, but anyway, we'll get started here. I often use this picture right here in school presentations, and I'll ask the kids, well, which side of the picture do you think the forest is going to be healthier? And 99.9% of the times they point to the right side over there and say the side with the most trees. And I often hear that now from people that live here is the most common thing I actually hear is I moved here for the trees. What we need to realize is the Black Hills probably hasn't always looked that way, and we go back into very recent history here, 140, 50 years ago, we see that we were looking at a much different situation than we are today. This picture is a little bit dark here, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is most of us probably don't want to go back 150 years. We want a nice forest, and they're essential to our economy and they're essential to our well-being. But we can work with Mother Nature a little bit and try and appease her, and hopefully have a healthy forest when we're done. One of the first things I do when I talk to a landowner, and John's covered this a little bit, is to get the landowner objectives before I start drawing up a management prescription or plan for them. And the most common ones that I run into now are people want to reduce their fire risk. They want to improve their forest health. They want to have wildlife. They want a pretty forest to look at. They might want to try and get some diversity in their forest and get some hardwood enhancement in there. And there's a lot of people there now with horses, and there's still a few old-time ranchers out here that want to improve their forage production a little bit. Those are the most common goals and objectives that I get from people. One of my pet peeves is property boundary lines, and John mentioned that a little bit too in his presentation, but you'd be surprised at how many people that I run into that don't know where their boundary lines are at. It's hard for me to believe that you can buy a piece of property and not actually know where your property boundary is at there. So I could do a whole class on surveying easily, and in my next life when I come back, I might just be a surveyor because I do enjoy doing it. But we're just going to mention a little bit about it here today. One of the most important pieces of paper that you own if you're a property owner is your survey plat. And the plat, this is happens to be an old plat from a mineral survey from probably the late 1890s, real early 1900s there. But the plat tells us everything. It tells us where the corners are at. It tells us the distance and bearings on the property boundary lines there. It tells us what the corners are. So very important piece of paper. And you need to keep that in a safe place and know where it's at there before we start to do forest management. Some of the common corners that we run into today, if you happen to border the Forest Service, this top one up here, it's called the brass cap. It's actually a piece of brass stuck on a pipe into the ground there. And we find those both when we border Forest Service and if we happen to own a homestead, an HES or an old mineral survey, a lot of times the corners will be brass capped. Some of the corners that we see a lot on the old mineral surveys are these pitch posts stuck in the ground. They're actually, even though they were stuck in the ground 100 years ago, a lot of them are still actually there. And today what we find if we have a surveyor property is the wooden lath there, and then the rebar and either aluminum cap or plastic cap that are stuck in the corner. These you know, once these are established, if I was a landowner, I would go out there and try and mark those more permanently. A lot of that wooden lath will disappear in a couple years probably. You know, I'd take and pound in a steel fence post or pile up some rocks or do something there so I knew where that corner was at all the time, because you won't be able to find it after a couple years after they survey it. The witness tree or bearing tree, very important tree there. A real hefty fine for cutting one of those down. When they originally did the surveys back in the late 1800s there and early 1900s, they would take and cut or into the tree there and then scribe into the tree, and that on the bottom of the tree there, it's kind of hard to see, but you'll notice that there's an area cut out right there, and that's got a whole bunch of information into it. There's usually 3 of those, and they always point to the corners. And then nowadays, like the Forest Service will also stick a sign up on top up there too, telling you the distance and the bearing to the corner there. So those are important trees. The way the lines used to be marked, the boundary lines, is chopping into a tree called blazing. And you can see up here in the upper left there, that's in the center of the tree there. That says that the boundary line ran right through the center of the tree. If we get a blaze off on the side of the tree there, that means the property line is on this side of the tree actually. Today, if you border Forest Service there, a lot of times when the Forest Service surveys now, they put in these nice red posts with the yellow signs on there telling where their property is at. And surveyors today, when they come out to your property and survey, the rebar and the wooden lath is what's used. And once they've got the line established, there, you know, the wooden lath doesn't last. So go ahead and paint your boundary line in, and you know, do something to help establish the corners a little bit more. So when you ask me to go out there and do a forestry practice for you, I can find the boundary line a little bit easier. Saves a lot of conflict in the long run. After we've established the boundary lines, then our next step is to flag in the area that we're going to treat. And the biggest improvement since I've been in forestry that's come along is the GPS. It's just amazing, because we used to have to go out there and hand measure all that stuff, either pace it or drag a tape or a chain along with it and measure it, and shoot the bearing there and record all that, and then try and get it to all line up when we brought it back to the office there. Sometimes if you were thinking about an old girlfriend or doing something else, you wrote down the wrong bearing or the distance there, and nothing matched up there. So the GPS has been the best thing to come along since I've been in forestry. We go out there, lay that out. We lay it out first, flag it in, then walk around it with the GPS, and we can download it on the computer, produce these nice maps nowadays that are either on a quadrangle or on a photo there. And you know, they're within really close. You know, most GPSs now are within 10 feet, so they're very accurate. A lot better than pacing. You know, once we've got our practice laid out in the field there, and we've started to look at our goals and our objectives there, the next thing that I look at, and surprisingly, it's one of the things that resource professionals overlook the most, is the soil. Soil tells you everything. It tells you how the trees are going to grow. It tells you how many trees you can have there, how you can open up the trees. We have a lot of mica in the Black Hills here, which loosens up the soil. So sometimes if we open up our stand too much, the wind will blow it over on us there. So after I get goals and objectives, the first thing I look at is the soil. And nowadays we look at threatened and endangered species for wildlife too. We look at all the archaeological values out there. We look at the numbers and types and sizes of the trees, the insect and disease, and the fire risk. Then after that, we've got the maps, and then we can produce the recommended treatment, or it's called the prescription generally. We a lot of times on our even on our pre-commercial stuff, we'll do an inventory out there, and you know, this picture, it's got to be the Forest Service out there, because the state only has one person or 2 people for the whole Black Hills to do this type of work. So unfortunately, we have to do most of that by ourselves there. When we do an inventory, a lot of times with the smaller trees, we'll do a fixed plot. And we do a 1/300th acre plot, which is basically, we just take a stick that's 6.8 feet long and swing it around, and then tally all the trees that fall inside that circle there. And that gives us the number of trees that we have per acre, and then we'll measure the sizes of them too. And diameter is always measured 4.5 feet above the ground, and I think, you know, if you guys have seen some of the previous stuff, I probably don't need to dwell on that a lot there, but I do have a diameter tape with me there too. But it's measured 4.5 feet above the ground, and on the uphill side of the tree all the time. We have to be consistent when we take those measurements there. And the heights, nowadays we have a really nice tool, which is probably the second best invention. It's called a hypsometer. From any distance, we can shoot the height of the tree, and we'll take the age out there too, which we use a tool. It's a boring tool. It looks like a hand drill almost, where we drill into the tree and extract the core of there, and then count the rings on there. Sometimes if the stand is too old, we won't get the response that we want from it there. So we'll age the trees there just to know what we've got out there, and also take percent slope and look at the ground cover when I'm out there too. The contractors need to know that. We take and marry up the objectives and the statistics and the soil there to produce the prescription. And nowadays, you know, we used to have to do all this by hand, and you had to be half a mathematician to figure it all out. But nowadays, we can just take all those statistics and plug them into the computer and punch that easy button there, and it just spits it all out for us there. So it's a lot easier than what it used to be. Our prescription there, you know, what we get from that, there's a lot of information there that the contractor needs. Foresters just don't go out on beautiful fall days there to gather that data. It's all data that's needed to tell us how we're going to cut that area there that we're working on. When we write the prescription, we get the spacing, we get the number of trees that need to be cut, the size of the trees that need to be cut, the slash disposal that's required, the slope. If there's other hazards out there, I always put that in my prescriptions. If there's like a talus slope out there, or if there's a bunch of dead trees or something that a contractor needs to be concerned about, a power line, or even if there's a lot of poison ivy out there. And the landowner gets information from it too. He can find out the number and sizes of trees that we're going to leave out there. Basal area. Basal area, John talked about it a little bit. It's just a term that measures the cross-sectional density of an area there. And like if I told you needed 50 basal area to slow down the mountain pine beetle problem there, and your stand averaged 10 inches in diameter, you'd have to have approximately 22 feet between trees to reach that 50 basal area there. And we can predict the growth and yield there too from some of these statistics. Though nowadays with mountain pine beetle, you're probably going from a day-to-day basis a lot of times, and you're not really too worried about what's going to happen 10 or 15 years from now. When we cut a tree down, we make a mess, and the mess, the residue that's laying out there, the boles and the stem and the tops of the trees, that's called slash. South Dakota has a slash law that requires you to treat that slash, and there's a number of different ways to do that. The first one's called lop and scatter, and that all lop and scatter means is to meet state law is you have to cut that slash up into chunks and cut enough limbs off it so it drops down below 18 inches on the ground. It's one of the benefits of lop and scatter is it's probably the cheapest way to treat the slash. Another, when it breaks down, it does provide humus and other materials for the soil and to improve the soil. The biggest disadvantage is that you probably have a high fire danger there yet for 3-4 years, or even up to 9-10 years, depending on where you're at in the hills before it starts to break down there. So there's pluses and minuses to all the different ways of treating the slash. Piling, piling, you get everything cleaned up that way, and piles can vary anywhere from hand pile size to machine piles, which are can be huge, maybe up to a city block in length, and 30 feet tall, 20-30 feet tall. The one advantage of piling is, it looks really nice when you get done. The biggest disadvantage is when you burn those piles, you can do horrible things to the soil there. You can actually cause the soil to turn hydrophobic, which means it won't absorb moisture. And when it gets into that state there, all that will grow is probably Canadian thistle and maybe leafy spurge or a few other things that you don't want, mullein, that you don't want there. A lot of times when we burn, we'll bring in machinery to take and turn the soil over and maybe pull some soil in from the sides there and then reseed it. So we don't have that disturbance there for a long time. One of the newer things that's come to the Black Hills with slash treatment is feconning. A fecon is a machine that has a rotary head on it with a lot of carbide teeth in it there. It spins at a very high rate of speed. It kind of looks like an old stump grinder. And the machine will start, if we're in a green stand of trees, he'll raise his machine up as high as he can reach on the tree, grind through the tree, the top falls over, and then he'll grind the rest of the tree, the stem, all the way down to the ground, and then run over the top and grind that up. And it produces your slash is probably in a lot smaller chunks than if you lop and scatter. It's not as small as chipping, but you'll get chunks that are maybe up to 2-3 feet long, and a lot of smaller chunks. It does disperse real well when they do this. That stuff really flies out of that machine there. You don't want to be doing it next to a picture window or be standing anywhere close when they're doing that, because it does fly out all over the place there. But it's amazing how fast the grass comes back in on those fecon sites there. So the pluses are it reduces the fire danger quite a bit. It changes the consistency of the fuel there. You've still got the same amount of tons per acre out there, but the fuel is in a different state there where it doesn't burn as readily as what it would be if it was lop and scatter. Fairly reasonably priced. A lot of times it'll run $400 to $500 an acre to have that done. Where piling can run $700 to $1,000 an acre. Lop and scatter might be in that $300 to $400 range. Commercial chipping, it's an option that we don't currently have here in the hills anymore. From probably the late 80s through the early 2000s, we did. and I used it a lot on my pre-commercial thinning there. It's all mechanized. We'd have they'd fell the trees with a feller buncher, which puts the trees all in a pile. You'd have a grapple skidder come pick up those piles, and then they'd drag it to the chipper, run it through the chipper, and blow the chips into the chip van. That was a huge chipper. It would chip, you know, a 23, 4, 5-inch tree without a problem. And the chips went to Merilot, or you know, the particle board place there. But because of some changes, we don't have that option anymore. You know, it'd be nice if someday it comes back, because it was a good way to treat the fuel. When it's chipped, the heavier chips blow into the chip van. The lighter material, like the needles and the bark, blew off to the side there, so you had just a minor pile of residue there of bark and needles left after that operation. Chipping, you know, chipping appeals to a lot of people because it looks pretty when you get done. You want to keep your chip depth as low as possible. You know, I like 3, 4, 5, 6 inches maybe at the most. The grass will come back fairly fast through there. This chipper sitting over there on the right side of the screen there is actually a remote control chipper that you can run with a remote control. You can, you know, go up fairly steep slopes with it. It's got a winch on it where you can pull the trees up to the chipper there and chip it. It looks great. You know, if it's done right, the grass comes back fairly fast. You get a park-like look after it's done there. You know, the biggest disadvantage probably is the cost. You know, it runs in excess of $1,000 an acre most times to have that done. And as long as you keep the chip depth low, you know, it greatly reduces your fire danger. If the chips get put into too big a pile and you happen to have a fire afterward, or sometime, you know, after it's been chipped, the fire will get into those chip piles and just smolder for a long time. I can remember when I first started on fire crew, we did a bunch of chipping and chip piles that were probably as high as this table, and 15 years later I'm back to the same spot fighting the fire, and they're trying to put fire out in those chip piles, and the chip piles are still there, and it just smolders forever. So get them spread out if you're going to chip. I'm just going to talk real briefly about with contracts, even with thinning non-commercial stuff. We always advise getting a contract. What I do is I hand you a list of contractors when we're ready to start looking for one there. And unfortunately, I can't go down the list and say this guy is good, this guy is not so good, and this guy is horrible. Don't ever hire him. I can't do that. So what you need to do is get what I tell people is to get as many bids as possible. You know, up to 3 anyway, if you can. And it's not always possible to do that, but at least try and get 2. Always ask the contractor for proof of insurance and workman's comp. You know, the liability issues today are just crazy. So you don't want to go there. Ask the contractor for references. And sign a contract. It protects both parties. It's not just the landowner, it's also the contractor too. So you need a contract. And then you can shake hands on it. Just real briefly, just a little bit on BMPs. And BMPs is just forestry slang for best management practices. Like John mentioned earlier, we're all stewards. We want to do the best possible job we can and leave the land in as best possible condition we can. So we want to use practices that are going to do that. You know, generally with the pre-commercial operations, what we're looking at is maybe some skid trail rehab, and some landing rehab, and some brush pile rehab. Reseeding on the brush piles and the landings, usually, and maybe a little bit of dirt work on the skid trails and haul roads there. We might have to put in a water bar, and a water bar is just something that we would cut into the trail perpendicular to the trail, and maybe at about a 30-degree angle to slow the water movement from going straight down the trail, and then run it off the side of the trail there. So those are the most common things that we would run into with the pre-commercial operations. Real important to protect the resource. I'm going to talk about this just a little bit because we saw a lot of it in 2012. We have another bark beetle in the hills there that a lot of people aren't quite as familiar with. It's called the pine engraver beetle, or a lot of people know it as Ips, which is the scientific name for it. In 2012, in my career, it was probably the worst year that I've seen. I've seen 2 or 3 years where they've been bad. The engraver beetle, or the Ips beetle, is a beetle that generally goes into slash, especially the first generation. But in 2012, it was so dry out there that they couldn't tell the difference between slash and live trees. And starting in April already, I was seeing him going into large trees. I mean, trees that were typically would be killed by mountain pine beetle that were 10 plus inches in diameter, and killing those trees. And they continued all the way into the summer and early fall there. This beetle's got three generations a year, and so they're continually flying, not like the mountain pine beetle, which only has 1 generation a year. They'll start in early April and go all the way into early September. And generally not a problem unless it's a dry spring. And when it's looking like it's going to be a dry spring, I usually advise people not to start thinning until about August. And that's because we're nearing the end of the beetle's generations there. That's toward the last generation the beetle is going to have. And the material dries out fast enough in August that they can't produce a brood. Some of the other things that we can do is to fecon or chip the slash. And we won't have the material there for breeding material, but we still have the engraver beetle is drawn to the area by the scent of pine, so we've still got the scent there to draw beetles in, and we're liable to still lose some trees, but we don't have the breeding material there for them, so we probably won't lose quite as many. But sometimes we don't have a lot of free play in the amount of time that we can do our work. So, but we get those dry springs. I'd like to not do any thinning until into August there, and then I'll probably cut it off in December already, because after December the material just won't dry out fast enough anymore. So they'll be able to jump right in there in the spring, produce a brood in that slash in the spring, and then jump to your standing trees that we've left there. So dry years, engraver beetles. Now, the one thing, and I'll maybe mention this a little bit later here too, there's ways to tell the difference between the two beetles. Now, I probably got 500,000 calls in 2012 with people telling me that their trees had been attacked by mountain pine beetle and they were dying. And these were a lot of the calls are in areas that traditionally haven't been mountain pine beetle problem areas. So we'll just go over just some of the differences there. And one thing I will point out right here is you got to be a butt person to tell the difference between beetles here. Now, if you look at this beetle real close, you look at its butt, it's got a bunch of spines on there. That's engraver beetles have a spiny butt there, and where mountain pine beetles got a nice round butt there. So if we have the beetle, we can tell the difference just by looking at the beetle. Some of the things there with engraver beetles, most of the time all we see is a little bit of brown boring dust there in the upper left there, and a real small hole where it looks like somebody shot the tree with a shotgun, basically. However, and with mountain pine beetle, on a typical year, you've got a lot of pitch tubes coming out of the side of the tree. Now that being said, if we have a dry year, mountain pine beetle doesn't always produce a pitch tube. A lot of times there'll just be a hole in there and boring dust. And we do have one species of ips that actually produces a pitch tube. So if we've got all this and we don't have the beetle right in front of us, how do we tell the difference? And that's where you can go out and really impress your friends and neighbors there now. Is we take and peel the bark off and look at the galleries underneath the bark. Galleries are where the beetles live and play and eat and do and mate there. So with the engraver beetle galleries, and I've got some examples in a box here too if you'd rather look at an actual example. Engraver beetle galleries, there's a central chamber there, right here, called the nuptial chamber, and that's where the male and 2, 3, maybe even 4 females get together, and after they mate, the females will radiate out in an X or a Y-shaped pattern there. We're with the mountain pine beetle gallery over there on the right. Up to 5, John says. So, yep. The mountain pine beetles are monogamous. They mate with one female. After they mate, the female chews her way up through here like this, lays her eggs, and the stuff off to the side is where the larvae are hatching and starting to feed right there. So that's how you impress your neighbors there when they want to know what killed their tree. Any questions on that? If anybody's got questions, just go ahead and jump right in. Yeah?
I was told if you kind of ladder your slash piles throughout the year, you can keep drawing the ips into the new green stuff.
Yep, that's true. Especially, if you have a normal year there, they'll just keep going right into the slash there. That's real important. If we start to thin in the spring there, if we don't continue to lay down the green slash there, the beetles can go from the green slash into the standing trees that we've left, and we don't want that to happen. So if you can continue to lay it down, or like you say, ladder the slash in there, and that's actually one of the control methods that we can use for engraver beetles is to make piles, and the larger the pile, probably the better, because the material will stay a little bit greener in there, and they'll actually stay in the pile the whole year there. So.
I'd seen on the photo they initially had up there, it looked like maybe they had a runway for skidding, and some of the trees were damaged. Was that lower damage enough to draw on the ips?
It can be, especially on bad years. The lower damage there, we have another bark beetle called the red turpentine beetle, which is very commonly attacks those trees. Now the turpentine beetle usually doesn't kill a tree, but it'll produce a big pitch tube on there, which is usually bigger than what mountain pine beetle does. It's very often confused with mountain pine beetle. In fact, I had somebody in the office just yesterday that thought he had mountain pine beetle, but it was actually turned out to be turpentine beetle. Turpentine beetles are usually confined to the lower part of the tree, the lower 5, 6, 7 feet of the tree. Instead of the real fine brown boring dust that you see with mountain pine beetle, you'll see a coarser material there that looks like granular yogurt or granola or coarse table salt. At the base of the tree. They can kill a strip of the tree, the conducting part of the tree there, but they usually don't kill the whole tree. They can weaken it, so another beetle will come along, especially the engraver beetle, and finish it off later there. So, any other questions?
Is all the branches that were broken from snow damage going to be an issue, or did we get enough moisture that
Well,
won't hit as hard?
Well, hopefully they won't hit as hard. Now, like I say, the spring is in my experience, has been the telltale sign. If we get dry springs, then the ip beetle population tends to increase. Ips are opportunists. They like some type of condition in nature or stress to attack trees, and that's when they build up their high populations. Where mountain pine beetle is cyclic. It runs in 20, 30-year cycles, or who knows how long this cycle is going to run. But anyway, they're cyclic, not so much dependent on stress as the engraver beetle is. So, Just talk real briefly about some of the cost share programs that are out there to help landowners. The cost of treating pre-commercial stands is expensive. You know, like I briefly mentioned, anywhere from $300 to over $1,000 an acre to get the work done. So there are some government assistance programs out there to help you. The EQUIP program, Environmental Quality Incentive Program that the NRCS has, we do the field work for, is a real good program. We've been able to do a lot of acres under that program. One of the things I like about it is it just pays landowners a flat fee to do the work. It doesn't matter what it costs you. If you go out there and do the work yourself, you get paid the same. It's roughly $250 an acre for thinning, and they have a meadow enhancement program too. It's $3-something an acre. Or if it costs you, you know, if you have a contractor come in and it costs you $1,000 an acre, it pays the same, a flat fee. You don't have to get 3 bids or anything. You just know you're going to get that $250 back to thin. They also have another program, a wildlife habitat improvement program, designed more to improve habitat for wildlife. They're basically the same type of cost share structure on that too. There's some conservation district grants out there now. I think Lawrence and Pennington and now Custer County have received commission grants. Their program is a 50% cost share program where they pay 50% of the cost up to about $700 an acre there. So if it costs you $700 to get an acre to get it done, you'd get $350 back. You need to get bids with that program, and then they pay on the lowest bid. You can still use whatever contractor you want to use, but the funding is paid on the lowest bid. Wildland Fire has a program to thin around your house. They also have some other programs if you're lucky enough to fall into them. It's like winning the lottery where they pay the entire cost if in one of their priority areas there that they designate. If you happen to be in that, they pay the entire cost of having the work done. Otherwise, it's a 50% cost share program. Their prescriptions are just a little bit different. They don't take into account soils or anything. They're strictly fire danger, where it's a spacing guideline type thing where you're opening up your stand there enough, 30 feet or so between trees so the fire can't get into the tops of the trees, and you're doing some pruning, and then you have to do fuel removal too. They're either piling and burning or chipping or feconing or something along those lines there. Then Resource Conservation and Forestry, which is who I work for, we have the Mountain Pine Beetle Cost Share Assistance Program too. And currently that's a 75% cost share on most things. We'll talk about that just a little bit there. I guess being a German and a little bit tight, I guess I prefer salvage whenever it's possible. This is some of the things that I've done in my own house right here, and one of the things, I guess, about living in a 110-year-old house, you can do whatever you want to, but this is in my kitchen here. This is a little the table and drawer thing there that I made there, which you can see the bottom is all made out of bugwood there. The top is actually birch, and some of the paneling that I've done there. That's one of the things that I'm probably most disappointed in is I don't think we've done a good enough job to try and market the product from Mountain Pine Beetle. Here's a piece of tongue and groove that Nyman's produces right here. Beautiful stuff. But anyway, I'm a salvage person if it's possible. If not, there's some other options out there. The the thinning, 10 years ago I'd have probably stood up here and told you that if you thinned your stand to a certain basal area there that you're not going to have a problem. Well, I can't do that today. Even in some of the stands that are thinned to the basal areas that I recommended, they're still getting hammered in some of the areas. Now thinning is going to help. It's going to reduce, you know, the incidence quite a bit, but you're still going to have mountain pine beetle. It's not going to eliminate it. So that's an important point that you need to remember. With thinning, I'm going to steal a phrase from the Forest Service entomologist Kurt Allen. He stresses the 3 Ds, and the 3 Ds are very important. It's diameter, diversity, and mine's just a blank here. Diameter, diversity, and density. Yep. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. But we need to look at all those things there. If we've got other species out there, we might want to try and promote some of those. If we have aspen, birch, or oak or something in our stand, try and get that diversity in there so it isn't just a solid monoculture of ponderosa pine. We can, the removal and salvage, of course, you know, you get the stuff out of the woods that way. It's gone. Cutting and chunking, that's another option there. It works. The sooner you can get it done, the better. If you can get it done in December, and if you leave the chunks where the sun will hit them a little bit, and maybe go out and rotate the chunks once or twice after that, there it'll help kill the beetles there. It isn't 100% effective. At best, you're going to kill, 80 to 90% of the beetles probably. At worst, I've seen times when it gets done late in the year where it doesn't seem to work very well at all. So, be one thing to remember if you're cutting and chunking. Try and get it done as early as possible, and try and get out there and roll it around a little bit. Maybe just one other thing on the cutting and chunking too. If you're doing that right around your house. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I had left all that material there. I'd want to try and eventually pick it up and dispose of it somehow so the fire danger is reduced around my house there. And I don't think that we have a cost share program for that. It's just something you're going to have to do on your own, but it needs to be done if it's around a structure there. So. Tarping, unfortunately I don't have a very good picture of tarping there that probably wouldn't pass inspection there because they like to have the tarp covered with soil or something tight on the bottom there, something a little tighter than the logs there. Again, it's the solar action there of the tarp that kills the beetle. And use the heaviest material that you can find to do that with. Because if you stop and think about it, the beetles can chew through a tree, and they can chew through a piece of plastic too. And if the lighter the material too, the easier it's going to deteriorate with sunlight and get blown around with the wind and stuff too. So use the heavier material if you're going to do that. Chipping, of course, works. Peeling, the picture there in the lower right there is a guy west of Custer that actually built himself a peeler, and seems like it works pretty well. He can peel a 12-inch 16-foot log in probably less than a minute with that there. So, and with that, that gives him the option of keeping the log there for a while too, without the beetles flying out of it there, because once it's peeled, the beetles are. It's got a typical head on it there, like a debarker, like you would see in a sawmill. So it pretty much chews everything up pretty good. Burning, burning isn't one of the options that we cost share, but of course it's very effective. If you have mountain pine beetle and you can get the bark burned off the chunks, you're definitely gonna kill the beetles. So. And preventative spraying, preventative spraying works very well. We've had some problems with it this year, and John will probably mention that later. But it still works. It's important to, you know, to use reputable people and ask for references when you do that. Just in conclusion here, now I guess all of these people are a little different. We have a actual, honest-to-goodness rocket scientist in there. We have an oil executive, and we have probably one of the most remarkable women I've ever met in my life there. They have one thing in common. They're all stewards, and that's what forestry is all about. It's science, but it isn't rocket science. So we combine a little bit of science and some stewardship and people that care, and we have good forestry.